Welcome to this video. In this video, we will be talking about risk management. Risk management is an interesting topic in an agile world because most everything that we do in agile contexts is about risk management. But there's some explicit things that you can do and should be doing in order to manage risks on your projects or your programs. So let's jump right in. All right, what the heck is a risk in the first place? Sometimes people get things mixed up and they'll use risk when they really mean assumptions and different kinds of things. So risk is any exposure to danger, right? So any time that you're potentially going to have something happen. Now, the difference between a risk and an assumption is it states right here. An assumption is something you believe 100% is going to happen. So this is what's going to happen along the way. We believe that wholeheartedly. Then that's an assumption, not a risk. If there's some kind of percentage chance that it might happen, that's a risk. So that's your difference in language, just to have clarity about what we're talking about. So, and yeah, but we'll talk about the language here in a little bit. Something may happen that may result in some consequence. The biggest project risks in any kind of effort, the biggest risk in any kind of work really is A, we deliver nothing, or B, we deliver the wrong thing, right? And the customer goes, I didn't want this, I'm not paying for it. C, you deliver the right thing too late, or D, you deliver something that just flat doesn't work. So those are the four biggest things that you want to avoid. There's a million other there's a million other things that might be huge for your project, but these are the four biggest risks that every organization needs to be addressing. Being agile, taking an agile approach to things, really reduces risks in most of these areas through several different aspects of agility, right? Incremental delivery helps because you get feedback very quickly. Doing customer demos means you're showing the thing to your customer when you've got small amounts of it available. So they're able to see very quickly. If you're able to see very quickly if you're on the right track towards what they want. You fail fast in small increments so that if you do make a failure, which happens, so if you do fail, you fail a little bit and you're able to then pivot and do something new. We prioritize our work by the value that it can deliver to our customers. So we're not delivering the wrong thing, or hopefully we're not. If we are, we find out very fast again because we are delivering quickly. We loosely couple our systems or modules within any system. That way, there's not as much interaction between them, and what interaction there is between two systems within a product are very well defined. So you're able to know what's going on between those two things, and if there is a problem, you're able to quickly identify it and limit the impact. And we use distributed decision-making models, which makes it, you end up making better decisions. And we'll have a whole video on distributed decision-making, but you can look up articles that I've written on it as well. It's the idea that decisions that are centralized are more risky because the people who are closer to the information can make better decisions. Now, it's a proximal decision-making model. So the principles that we want to keep in mind when we are taking an agile approach at risks is we want to focus on what's most important, right? It's just like a value-based releasing. We want to focus on the most important pieces of the effort or the product. So I'm not going to put a ton of time into evaluating the risks on low value, late in the project work, right? I'm going to make those risks visible anytime I can. I want to make sure that things are highly visible. I want to involve everyone in the organization that's reasonable, the most people possible that may be impacted by this. So because I want to get the input from them. Somebody may have information that would help us either identify or mitigate a risk in a timely manner. or have an alternative contingency in case something does happen. So you want to make it a living document, a living, constantly updated, constantly reviewed. In traditional project management, I've seen it a million times because I've done it for years and years. Good Lord, I've done it for decades. um, where risk identification is done upfront in like the chartering and planning sections of a project, but it isn't kept up to date throughout the life cycle, and then it comes back to bite people at the end or in the middle of mid-project review or something like that. We want to, in an agile context, keep these things alive and in front of you all the time. So making it visible, making everyone involved, and make things fast. Don't make this a tedious process. Make these things lightweight documentation so that you can get through it and just be aware of it. There's 3 key times when you want to be identifying risks. We'll talk about some other things, but these are the key ones: initial planning, sprint planning, and the daily stand-up. These 3 times you want to at least be aware of what's going on. A lot of Agilists don't even think about this or talk about it, but really it's something that you want to be keeping in mind, especially in critical kinds of projects. If you're talking about life safety criticality, if you're talking about high cost projects that are high risk to your organization, like if this project fails, our company goes under, those kinds of things, then you want to be keeping these 3 times in check so that you're constantly paying attention to the risks so that nothing surprises you, right? So in the initial planning process, you want to be looking at the overall project. You want to be looking at internal and external risks. You want to be looking at risks on the features themselves, and then risks associated with the schedule, associated with the budget, associated with resources, all of those elements. Actually, I'll show you something called reverse Ishikawa that was called reverse Ishikawa. That will be a great tool for you. It's something I developed for identifying risks in all the different parts of a project. During sprint planning, you want to be thinking about it, right? You want to think about what are the risks associated with this feature. We identified them in our initial planning process, in that, the high level release planning. But now we're doing more detailed sprint planning. Let's dive in it a little bit more. You want to keep a risk burn down. If you're in a critical project or critical product, you want to be tracking and burning down your risks. I'll talk about what that means, because again, not many people deal with a risk burn down. They've seen a project burn down or a sprint burn down, but not a risk burn down. And in the daily stand-up, this is what stand-ups actually are all about, is coordination and risk avoidance. The whole point of coordination is that there's risk associated with it. If I'm working in one part of the code and you're working in another part of the code, there's a risk that we're going to step on each other if we're not decoupled enough, if those modules are too closely associated with, or if maybe we're both working in the same part of the code, then we certainly need to be working together. In construction, they have stand-ups every day as well, and that is, again, a risk mitigation thing. They want to be able to say, hey, I'm going to be swinging a girder through the 2nd floor in section 2 today. Anybody going to be there? Oh, yeah, I planned on being there. Well, you might want to put your head down at about 1:35 today, because we'll be swinging a girder through and I don't want to take your head off. Right there, it's a life safety thing. It's easy to find yourself not paying attention to that in a software project or a services project where you're not seeing life or death situations. So these are important times. Risk realization, that's in the stand-up, that's when things happen, right? You may in the stand-up say, what happened yesterday was, and then they'll tell you what happened, and there's your risk that just happened to occur. And sometimes new roadblocks result in new risks. So risk management, there's 3 unique things in an Agile context: the risk burn down, risk adjusting a backlog, and doing risk prioritization. wow, EMV stuff. You'd have to be on a really, really big project to have EMV make sense. But I include it because it's been developed by people for keeping track of this kind of stuff. So if you wanted to do it, you could, but I've never done it, and I've done some big ass projects. All right, risk burn down. Pretty simple. It views your risk in days to recover. So if a risk were to occur, how long would it take us to get back on track? Which is a great way of looking at it. It's a very innovative perspective on risks. A risk is a milestone that's passed. As a risk milestone is passed, the risk is removed. So what that's talking about is burning down the risk. So as a part of your risk analysis, you identify the risk milestone, right? When is this risk most likely to happen? If you pass that time, then that risk is removed from the backlog and therefore burned down. So if it was a 2-day risk or a 7-day risk, say, and the opportunity for it to happen passed, then you'd change your chart and burn that down by those 7 days, because that's not going to happen, right? And you should review it each sprint planning session. So here's a way of looking at it. So some new software might require a hardware update. What's the percentage chance of that? The probability is 60% probability. You'd lose 25 days. Therefore, your risk exposure is 25 times 60, which is 15 days. Blah, blah, blah. 15 times 10 days is 2.5 days, blah, blah, blah. Here you can see your risk exposure is 32.5 days. Now, you would plot that on a risk burn down chart if this was like, this is like at the end of the sprint, or end of the project. But this would be, say we're at sprint number 5. Well, we've passed the milestone for some of these risks to have happened, but we still have 150 days worth of risks that could happen. We could be as much as 150 days behind. By having this, you're able to look at it and go, wow, I can tell the risk associated with what we're doing. So value-based prioritization really just looks at the monetary instead of the time. Just another way of viewing it. And you build it into your backlog. So you would do this crazy calculation where you're looking at probability and the value of it, the cost value, right? So if the coin flip was worth $100 or no dollars, the value is 50% is 100, 50% is 0. Then you can show the possibilities here. There's oh, that's the difference here. This is a coin flip. This is a roll of dice, right? So there's one chance, a 16.6% chance of winning, or 0.00000. So then you would take all that and insert those associated with whatever risks you had identified in your risk identification chart. So like this one here has a chart, you would create the same kind of chart that would show the probability and the cost instead of number of days. You would insert those where they would happen in the backlog. If this and this were associated with one another, you would put them together, and those would come into the sprint together, and then would be taken out of the sprint if that risk did not occur during the sprint where it was supposed to have occurred due to the story that it was associated with. So it passed. Then you've seen that $440,000 risk go by, right? They're put in there as anti-value. So this is actually a negative number. So you're able to calculate the value in the backlog, the value of the backlog with this risk associated with it. I hope that makes some sense. Again, it's not the kind of thing that most people end up doing.